All right. Well, today on the Churchology Podcast, we're excited to bring in some friends of mine to talk about what it's like for them as pastors and just the state of the church. And so today on the show, we've got Travis Davenport and Danny Donato. Now, I'm going to throw it to you guys, and Travis, we'll start with you. Just tell us a little bit of where you are, your story. Introduce yourselves. Introduce yourselves to our audience, man. Travis, you go first.
Yeah, so my wife and I, Vanessa, we moved to Grove City, which is right outside of Columbus, Ohio, just about 11 years ago, and planted Covenant Church. We moved here with a couple friends, a group of friends, and we sold our houses and moved here. We didn't know anybody and just felt that God had called us to start a new work here. And so that was 11 years ago. And now we're still a church. We're still growing, still seeing God do amazing things, getting ready to break ground on our first building, our first permanent location, which we're really excited about, a long time overdue. And we're really involved in clearly missions, but also just local church planting as well. So we really have a great process of raising up new leaders and planting churches. That's really our heart. So that's where we are. That's what we're doing today.
Awesome. Danny, tell us who you are, man. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so met my wife in the same city Travis did, the Ville in Kentucky, and landed first position. First two positions were typical youth pastor positions in churches in Western Kentucky. Was down there for 10 years, and just felt God leading me to really plant a church. And so called one mentor, and he said, "That's awesome, man. We're going to get you in a good spot, good city, man. You do awesome. We'll get you a good core team." And then called another mentor, and he's like, "Are you an idiot? You have 5 kids. How are you going to support them?" And started. And so anyways, through that process, got in touch with Lighthouse, where we're at here in Southern Illinois. And it was really a church that had been planted back in 2000, but they were just had been without a pastor for about 2 years almost. And they were just looking for somebody with vision and a heart. They just need somebody to pastor them. And so it was kind of I got to cheat and really replant this church with 80 core members. So I got to replant the church. And so we've been here for 10 years now. And same as Travis, we're trying to partner with church planters and planting our own churches as well, which is part of our story. I'm sure will come out here in a little bit.
That's awesome. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to get you guys together is because here we are. So we're recording this about the middle of May. And so we've been in COVID, pandemic, lockdown, just all kinds of different things, a year and 5 months. I'm in Kentucky. Travis is in Ohio, and Danny is in Illinois. And we were talking before we even started recording. I follow you guys pretty closely, social media. We've been friends for a while, but I'm checking you out every week. You know, I'm following you guys. And what I see is radically different. Just radically different responses. And even just what I hear out of those states is just different from even where I'm at in Kentucky. So I just wanted to drill down into that story and see how you guys have kind of navigated this season. Danny, we'll start with you. What is this? Give us a sense of what it was like for you. One, when the pandemic started, so going back to last March, and then kind of where you are now.
Yeah. So I think we were at the same place that both you guys were, and every pastor in the United States was at that point, was like, what is going on? What do we need to do? Everything's shutting down. And so really trying to answer that question, do we need to pull the plug for a little bit? And I remember it was March 19th was when we had our leadership meeting. And here's why I know that, because that weekend was our going to the community. We were launching our second campus on March 29th. And so we pulled the plug and shut everything down on March 19th for that March 22nd Sunday. And so we did that, and we did it with the idea of let us be the good neighbor. We can meet if we want. We're free as a church to do that. And but let us be the good neighbor, and let us do. Nobody knows what this thing is. Talked to several of our medical professionals in our church. That's what they were advising us with. Fast forward to the beginning of May, we weren't seeing the numbers in our community, not spiking as they were in cities and in other areas. And so we made the decision with whether the governor was going to do what he was going to do, that we felt, okay, we need to go ahead and start moving back and meeting again. And we communicated that to our church that, hey, this is the decision we're making. We feel the Holy Spirit is leading us to do that. And we want you to make that same decision as a church member. If you feel convicted by the Spirit, you feel convinced that it's okay to meet, then go ahead and do that. If not, then you can stay at home as well. And so we began meeting at the end of May. So we were only out for a couple of months. We had some really awesome ministry opportunities in those couple of months, but just, the total picture, we shut down for those 2 months. We picked back up and we met till November. And then one of our key leaders and her husband got COVID. They're both leaders in our church. And so it was our worship leader and our tech row leader both got COVID. And so they had so many touch points with people that we shut the church down for a couple of weeks. We were meeting online. We were just shutting in-person gathering down. But that's the only hiccup we've had. And I would say probably close to 90% of our people are back now.
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah. We've had new people that have come as well because other churches didn't respond as fast as we did. And so we've had people that were maybe driving 40 minutes to a larger church in a bigger city that ended up, they're now home and they're in their community, which is what we want. We don't want to steal sheep. That's not our goal, but we do want to encourage people to try to find a church in your local context. And so they ended up landing with us, and we've actually seen a couple salvations out of it as well. So that's kind of a nutshell, big story where we've been for the last year.
Yeah. Travis, what about you guys?
Well, I would say, so I would jump back just a little bit before 2020 hit. We always try to start off the year with like a word or a phrase, just to kind of something that we can rally around, just kind of thematically just move forward. And it's really crazy because around November of 2019, I kind of put that out there. We take some time to pray and fast as leadership and elders and stuff over that. The two words that came out were unity and preparation, which is just so crazy providential, right? Mm-hmm. And so we started off the year in January just talking about unity and preparation. The two phrases that we had were, I think it was, as a church, we are only as strong as we are united. And preparation was, as a church, we can't plan on a move of God, but we can prepare for one. And so God was really already showing off like his providence as we walked into January, because it was really a crazy year for a number of reasons. Number one, clearly we had this virus thing take root and do whatever it did, continue to affect us to this day. But also for us, we were supposed to break ground to build our church last April on Easter Sunday. Everything was a go, and due to the pandemic, our builder stopped working, just 100%. Not only that, but we're portable. So we've been meeting in a movie theater right in the center of town for 7+ years. They shut down completely. So now we're homeless. We can't break ground. We had a key staff member that we had to release during that time as well, due to a couple different reasons. And so there were 3 major things taking place at that time. We were forced to we didn't want to. We were homeless, man. We were forced to take our office space, which is like this 2,200 square foot building, and turn it into like a sound stage. I don't know what else to say. I was preaching out of one room. The worship team was in another room. Our audio was being run from someone's office. It was just crazy, man. And so it was really, for us, it was really, really hard. And everybody shut down. Every church shut down. Everybody. And we didn't really have a choice at that time, right? But much like Danny, we were really asking, okay, what's the best way to approach this? We didn't know what was going on, but we were definitely put in a position where we didn't have a choice because we didn't have a house. Fast forward to probably along the same timeline Danny's in May, we there was a lot of places that went out of business, a lot of gyms that went out of business. One of which was this really, like 24,000 square foot LA Fitness, this gym. And man, we called, and man, I don't even understand how, but we got into that space and signed a lease with them at a fraction of what it would ever cost. And so we moved right in. I think right in June, probably, I think it was, if I remember correctly, we went back live as soon as we could. And I know that we'll probably get into this a lot, but there was a lot of questions, right? A lot of questions about how do you come back. And much like what Danny said, we were not only one of the first ones back, we're one of the only ones back. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that and other things, I'm going to be honest with you, man, over the last year, we've doubled in size as a church. We've
awesome.
We've doubled in size as a church. We've seen people just like Danny. We've seen a lot of people meet Jesus, baptize a whole lot of people, started a whole lot more small groups, did a lot more leadership training. And we really tried to be sensitive to people's health concerns. But we also really wanted to make sure on a couple fronts for us as a church that we could move forward, right? And so, we started, our first service was like a mask mandate service. So we're like, hey, for people who have health concerns, we have a lot of small business owners that they're signing these forms saying they're not being around anybody who's not wearing a mask, whatever it is. So we started a first service that was like that. And then we started a second service that was, just free to come as you want. That service just like exploded. We had to start a third service for more people wanted to come as they want. We still have that first service now. Not a lot of people at it, but our second and third service really took off. So that's where we are now. We're getting ready to break ground now in about a month. So it's been a ride for sure.
Yeah. And when restrictions and things like that kind of went out last year, was that some states did it just blanket statewide? This is what's going to happen for the whole state. That's what Kentucky did.
Yeah.
Other states, it was county by county.
Yeah.
Travis, what were you guys? How did they work that in Ohio?
Yeah. Well, they started with zones, right? So different zones, whether those were county or not, I can't remember, but basically different counties, different zones were assigned different colors. And so if you were in a certain color county or zone, there was a certain type of mandate that you had to follow, even travel restrictions to a degree, like, hey, try not to do this, try not to do that. And we really try to be sensitive. We were in one of the highest zones, so it was recommended that we not gather at all, but we gathered anyway. And we worshiped, so I definitely have some thoughts on that. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment, but yeah, we then moved to a statewide mandate, I think is what it eventually went to. And to be honest with you, it was super confusing. Nobody really knew what was going on. Certain districts of schools were closed. Others were open. Some businesses were shut down. Others weren't. You couldn't go into that store, but you could go freely into that store. The churches that were opening, just extreme precautions, so it was, I think confusing is the best word at that time.
Yeah. Danny, what about you guys in Illinois? How was that?
Man, yeah, it was tough. We did the zones thing as well. But the zones didn't seem to make sense, especially for where we're at. So a lot of people think Illinois, Chicago. We're 5 hours from Chicago, so that has nothing to do with us. I'm 45 minutes from St. Louis, so that's when people ask where you're from, we just say St. Louis because that makes more sense to people. They can nail that on a map. And so a lot of the decisions that were being made, especially for people in our community and all around our surrounding communities, which are pretty rural, we were tied to Metro East, which is a big large city center right outside of St. Louis on the Illinois side. And so they tie all that. They were making all their decisions based on hospital beds and all that stuff, but they weren't taking into consideration that most people go over to St. Louis to go to the hospital, like, because that's where all the hospitals are. So we were getting skewed numbers, and so they were keeping us on really locked down, like, only, no restaurants open, no, only 10 people in a Kroger or whatever, and so pretty much our community, they threw all that out the window. They said, they're saying, here's government bureaucrats making decisions, and for a community that's gonna die, that if you don't open up, because like right now we have 3 active cases in our county. Now, I mean, we're a year and a half out, but still, compared to where your county is, especially maybe Travis's county, he probably has, still in the tens of thousands maybe active. I mean, we got 3 active cases today, the number came out. And so, it was hard it wasn't hard for me to make decisions in that sense. Like I went, okay, we're a little more free on that. But we had to actively decide, like, we're going to go against what the governor's saying. And we're going to do that prayerfully and humbly and willing to accept whatever consequence may come as a result of that. And so, but I felt like for the most part, our people and our community really responded well as a result of that.
Yeah. And so not only did you have, the pandemic, but man, I mean, just lockdown in March, a couple weeks after that, you had the death of George Floyd and racial tension. And then months later, divisive election. Then moving into 2021, you had, everything at the Capitol. I would love to hear, did you guys touch on any of those, maybe in your preaching and that sort of thing, those cultural issues? You say anything about, race? Did you say anything about, the political tension or that sort of thing? How did you try to navigate those kind of issues in your church? Danny, we'll start with you.
What happened at the Capitol?
Yeah, no kidding, right? You never heard of that.
So this has just been my view on every hot cultural issue that happens. Like, so if there's a huge thing that happens, whether it's and they just seem elevated this past year, and a big part of that's because of the pandemic, I think. But you have these things that are kind of making the country burst at the seams. I won't take a Sunday and go, hey, I'm just going to preach a sermon on racial, reconciliation, or I'm going to preach a sermon on how we should view politics. Or I just trust that, hey, as I feel the Lord's led me to prep my sermons for, however long out I prep them, that as I'm putting those together, I can fit those things in too and say, hey, here's how this scripture applies to this situation. And so, yeah, obviously we addressed the George Floyd murder. We addressed, the political tension. That became something that was sprinkled in a ton in my sermons. We're a very conservative community. We're in the rural Southern Illinois. And so it became something of a way for me to try to help our people engage in conversations with people that view you differently or have different political views and have different political lingo and so use this as a gospel opportunity to talk, what your real faith is about and what the real important things are above these things that our country is being divided on right now. So, so I didn't do hey, let's do a racial reconciliation series for 4 weeks or let's do a political series for 4 weeks. I just try to figure out how can they fit into, that Sunday sermon.
Yeah. And Travis, I'm going to ask you the same thing, but Danny, when you did that, did you experience any kind of pushback at all? Or was any concerns brought up?
When I did what? When I just
when you would sprinkle those things in. Yeah. When you would sprinkle those things into sermons.
No, because because I'm preaching the Bible. So if they're going to kick back, I'm going to go, okay, well, give me your biblical reasons for that. Give me your biblical mandates for it, And so, yeah, especially when it comes to the political stuff, probably the biggest thing that I would have caught flack on was going, hey, Trump's not our savior, because we just have a lot of Republicans around where we're at. So, I never caught anything about that, but saying, hey, like, we're not tied to a party. That's not, America is not heaven. This isn't the kingdom of God. And so, probably I got more kickback from people who I have very like political views with, because I'm trying to help them see, like, hey, man, we need to be more about Christ and his kingdom. While it is important that we care about the country we're in and we try to do what we can, the main thing is keeping Christ at the center of all that. And if I'm losing that testimony while I'm trying to prove, why capitalism or fascism or socialism or whatever viewpoint you're on, if I lose the opportunity to love well, serve well, and point people to Jesus well, then what's the point? Like, I just lost that. So I would have maybe got more kickback on that stuff. Like, hey, don't you think you're being a little light on some of these? No, I just want to major on Christ. That's it. So,
yeah. Travis, same thing for you. Did you bring any of those things up? If so, did you get any pushback? What was that like?
Yeah, so I would agree a lot with what Danny's saying. I mean, I see the pulpit as really steering the church. And so I want to reserve that space truly for us, for like expository biblical teaching, However, we did address various cultural issues, and items from racism to politics, but we try to address them first through the lens of a biblical worldview, second through the lens of unity, and third through the lens of our local community, right? Because for us, being right outside of Columbus, I'm going to be honest with you, our city was literally on fire. It was like a third world country. It was like a war zone. And we had a lot of cops, all the local cops who were out on the, outside of Columbus were called into downtown Columbus, were given riot gear. And I mean, it was just intense. And so really how we try to address that very much so was through the lens, first and foremost, of teaching. What's amazing about that, I know that you guys recognize this as well. I'll try and have my sermons prepared about 3 to 4 months in advance for various reasons, but it's amazing how after you put together.
Dude, you're awesome if you're doing 3 to 4 months in advance. you need to come do a lesson for me on that. I'm like, I got 3 days left.
It saves me on staff. The farther out I can get done, and part of my problem is I write my sermons out word for word, and so I literally write them out word for word. So I got these like long transcripts, you know what I mean? But then we ship them to our kids department, to our creative department, all the different things, so that they can do what they need to do. Saves us. So it's definitely a discipline. It took me a long time to do it, but what's cool is that you see how God, once again, providentially uses what you wrote 3 or 4 months ago in the exact situation week to week with what you're walking through in whatever political or racial climate that you're in. And so, yes, you're able to address, albeit topically through expository teaching, various issues, just like throw in a little thing here, a little thing there. However, I would say 2 other things. Number one, we did try to address very poignantly specific cultural issues through our small group discussion. We're sermon-based small groups for the most part. So we really tried to bring to the surface, because I think a lot of these issues, social issues, are issues that are best talked about in discussion, in community, in discussion with people love, trust. There's relational currency there. So somebody can feel free to say, well, I don't get the big deal with this, or I don't understand this, or here's my stance here. That's just quite frankly not going to happen on a Sunday morning. And so that's not the proper place, at least in my opinion, to have this great discourse about racism or about Republicans or libertarians or Democrats. It's just not. That is just this. And I'm not really interested, nor are you interested in hearing my opinion as much as you should probably be concerned with knowing what God's word says and then applying that to a biblical worldview from where you can come up with an opinion, a thought, whatever. So we really try to address those through our small groups, really tried to pour in a lot of energy and resource into our small group leaders during that time. A lot of care, a lot of time. And then also we started like this little podcast thing we're doing midweek where we also kind of talked about social issues. We invited different people. We did this one big conversation where we had a black woman, a black man, one of our local cops who was white from our congregation. We all just sat down and talked. We recorded it, put it out. And did we get pushback on that? Heck yeah, man. We definitely did. We got pushback on that stuff, but we continued to talk about unity, who we are as a church, what we're about, what we're doing. We got pushback when we started back with having church. But I would just say, I think for me, and it was kind of a fight, even I love our elders, but there was even I don't want to say fight, but there was strong conversations about these things. And that's why I'm so thankful for our elders to be able to have those conversations. But for me personally, I think that last year at this time, I felt an extreme sense of urgency, right? I mean, I think a lot of churches that even now could be open aren't open. And I mean, regardless of a pandemic, people still don't know Jesus. And we as a church, like we have this incredible opportunity to love people, as Danny said, serve people, as Danny said, and proclaim the gospel in a way that is unique to us as a church. And so when people were like, well, I don't think we should go back to church because, people are going to get sick. And my response was like, well, I can tell you this, 100% of people are sick right now, infected with sin, and they are actually going to die at some point in time. And it's incumbent on us to be that city on a hill, and so we've really tried to shift the narrative and remind people like, hey, this is the time that the church was built for. Like, this is the time that a church shines, when there's darkness, when there's chaos, when there's questions, when there's hopelessness and depression. That's when it is the time for the church to really be that unique entity, that body of Christ that it is. And so, quite frankly, did we get pushback on some of that stuff? Yes. Was that a concern? I mean, it hurts my heart to see people leave or go somewhere else. But if somebody is going to leave or go somewhere else or whatever, based on the fact that, like, hey, we're going to just continue to proclaim God's word in a loving way, then I'm not okay with them leaving, but I can't do anything about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. Absolutely.
And I also think the other thing, so I don't want to be long-winded, but I think the other thing too, one of the big things we talk about as a team with our team members, our small groups, elders, whatever, is, we try to look at people, and give me a second to put some context here. We try to look at people as a bank, right? Which sounds really bad coming from a pastor, but we try to look at them as a bank. We're more specifically a bank account. And so,
I've getting better right now, by the way.
What's that?
You better hurry this context on. You went from a bank to a bank account.
So I've spent the last 11 years depositing into the people in our church. Our staff members have spent the last 11 years making deposits into people, spiritually, even financially, mentally, emotionally, going to games, going to hospitals, doing funerals, doing weddings, discipleship, small group, planting church, just pouring into spending time, hip to hip discipleship. Why? Well, because it's what we're called to do, but also for a time like this, because we're making major withdrawals. If there's not the capital invested to make a withdrawal, then people are going to be bankrupt. And I'm going to be quite honest with you. We made some major withdrawals this last year from individual people, asking them to continue to fight for unity, asking them to overcome these social issues, asking them to come to church in general. Those are some withdrawals. But because because of the years of investing that relational currency, we were able, I believe, to make some significant relational withdrawals and still be at a balance with people and not be negative. And so I think that for me, shepherding in this last year, although it should always be important, has had an uber focus on it. Shepherding in all aspects, not just me, but our elders shepherding, our small group leaders shepherding, our worship pastor shepherding, our production manager shepherding, people taking and shepherding the people around them to continue to invest relational currency, because we're going to make those withdrawals.
Yeah, that's a powerful word, man. Just the focus on shepherding relationships and just calling them to follow Christ in the middle of that kind of everything going on in the culture, man. That's a strong word. One of the things that so many people are talking about right now is how discouraged pastors, church leaders are. I think Barna is putting out stats that are saying something like over 20, maybe 30% in their estimation of pastors or ministry leaders either have quit or are going to quit in this season as a result of this season. Just discouragement, the uncertainty, the anxiety of it. I would love to hear, has there been a time in the past year and 5 months where you were discouraged? What was the source of it, and how did you navigate it? Danny, let's start with you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there were. I felt when the pandemic first happened, like going into crisis mode, like that's where I thrive at times. I would sit down and I was like, man, like this is my wheelhouse. We haven't really had a crisis at our church. We did a vision campaign, we built a building, we did all that stuff Travis is getting ready to do, and I got all my gray hair from that and all that. And so, we've done that. And so I navigated that. I felt as well as I had been trained and that God led. But man, when this happened, like none of us had ever even discussed the possibility of anything like this happening here in America, where, hey, mandatory shutdown. And now, like, how do we respond and all that? And so, like, at the beginning, we really thrived as a church. We partnered with other churches. We helped a lot of our neighboring churches. We just threw out there like, hey, we're willing, because we'd already been doing live and all that on Sunday morning. So, hey, let's help you. If you need to get live and reach your congregation and serve them, like, we'll help you do that. So it was an opportunity for us to really partner with some other churches in that way. Changing how we did Sunday morning. We did like 1 or 2 songs maybe. We did the sermon, which usually is typically around 40 minutes, popped down to 15 minutes tops. And then we did a Q&A. We had a couch up there. Like, we just changed the whole feel. We said, look, people are sitting on their couch at home. I'm going to sit on my couch and preach. And so we did that from the stage, but my pastoral intern, he would kind of run as host, and then we were always fielding questions. So it was a creative way for us to like think through some stuff and have a little bit of fun with it. That fun lasted about a month. And then it was like, we're still in this stupid thing. And how am I supposed to go and knock on the door of my 60-year-old, member who's scared to death that they don't even want to talk through the window, almost because fear of what this. And so, man, that just always thinking through that, always hearing conversations from both sides. Hey, we should be back as a church. If we do, we're going to kill people, like balancing that the whole time. So I felt it at the beginning, like I was like, man, like killing it. And then, man, about the summer, even after we'd come back, man, I was exhausted, and I was mentally exhausted. I felt like I felt those. I had those questions creep up. Like, man, do I even want to do this? Why don't I just go get a factory job and I can just be a church member I'll be an awesome church member lay leader, and I can preach whenever the pastor wants off. Why am I taking the heat on all this? And So yeah, I had those questions. I didn't always deal with it well. My family maybe felt some of the brunt of that at times, or they definitely did feel the brunt of that at times. But through that, man, we just have an awesome network of pastors, and I've got some awesome leaders here in my church as well that really do love me and love my family, and so I'm thankful for that. Not everybody has that, but again, what Travis was saying, that didn't happen just at the pandemic. I've been here for a decade, and so those relationships have been built over time, tested, through fires, and so they were very gracious, very loving, very encouraging through all of that. Having other pastors that I could have those real conversations with, that at times, as much as you love maybe some of your key members, you don't need to have maybe some of those deep, hard conversations sometimes. Maybe you have that, but there's stuff I like to protect my people from at times. I don't want anybody to think like, hey, Danny's having some doubts about, And so to have those conversations with other pastors who live right around here was really helpful. And so, yeah, like I dealt with that. I had other pastors around here that I know were dealing with that, dealing with anxiety, depression, ready to quit. Somewhat Travis dealt with, you were homeless. Like you didn't have the option to stay open. Like you were like, nope, our building shut down. You can't come in it. And so we had guys up until the beginning of this year in this area that were in that situation. And so it was really rough on them. And so to be able to share that with other brothers, to go, hey, I've sucked at times, I've struggled at times, you have as well. Like we're here together in this. And so let's carry each other's burdens, to have a church that was willing to carry the burden with me, that would say, hey, you're not in this alone. So yeah, absolutely felt it. But I'm just going to say this and then I'll kick it over to Travis. Man, God never said this was going to be easy. And I think we've had it real easy ever since we left Louisville, just to be honest with you. As hard as maybe our ministry's been at times, let's just be honest. Like we haven't dealt with what some of our brothers and sisters around the world have had to deal with. And so for us to face this, maybe some adversity for the first time, like this, for me, I felt like this was God's really refining fire within the ministry and within the church. Like what we've seen is that if people wanted to leave, this was the perfect chance for them to get out of the church. Yeah. And so obviously we're encouraging people to come back, but I'm not going and begging them, trying to drag them back in. Like that's got to be between them and the Holy Spirit convicting them to come back. All I can do is have my loving arms open and ready. But that's what we've seen, is this has kind of been a pruning season. And so our prayer is that, okay, we're leaner in some areas, but man, we're stronger as well. And so I wish I'd have had Travis whispering in my ear, like God's preparing us for something, and so would have, had that going on, but he absolutely is. And so what's coming next, man, the church better be ready. And I think it's going to be ready. It's going to be a stronger, more on fire church. I'm just speaking about here in America, a stronger, leaner, better church for the kingdom.
Yeah. So that's a good word, man. So you just, yeah. And all of the pressures of all of those decisions, there's so many times where you just felt like no matter any decision made you lose. Any decision you lost. So the decision was, which side do you want to lose on? Yeah. Travis, what about you, man? What was it? Was there a point when, man, you just encountered discouragement? What was the source of it? And man, how did you navigate?
Yeah. So, man, there's so much to say. I mean, I love what Danny said. And I really would love to circle back if we could at some point and talk about that ending that he just said there about the church getting stronger. Mm-hmm. I really, really would love to say something about that. But I would say, for me, I think that we all went through our own personal stuff, right? Mm. But, and I do think I felt the separation, division to a large degree that the pandemic caused. But I'm going to be honest with you, first and foremost, that wasn't the thing that was causing me probably the most inner turmoil. and I want to be respectful and not jump into too much, but we had let go right in April a guy, one of our pastors on staff, and it wasn't a good situation. And so dude was a friend, close friend, a guy you work with for 8 years, and it was a tough situation. It involved other people in our church as well. And so having to convey that to about 400 people on a Zoom call was that was like, how do you convey that somebody is not going to be there? You're putting it online in a private Zoom call, invitation only to members. I'm sitting there at a table talking just like this. I've got, 6 elders standing behind me, like it's like Germany or something. It's like the weirdest, strangest thing, and having to navigate that, and super emotional about that. And that was where a lot of, for me, personal heartache was at that point in time. So I hate to say that the pandemic wasn't first in my mind, but I'm going to say, man, for a good month or two, it wasn't, because that was, my heart was broken, and so trying to comfort people through that. Moving forward, that was a drain. That was a bigger drain than I think I realized at the time. I didn't realize. Because look, we're all church planners. We've all got degrees in student ministry. Earlier, Danny said something about like he functions well in chaos. Well, of course you do. You're a youth pastor. That's all that youth ministry is. It's just organized chaos, Yeah. And so we get good at being MacGyver at some point in time. But so we do thrive in those conditions. But I did find myself over the summer feeling a little more tired, feeling a little more drained. And I think it was about August that I saw pastors in our area starting to quit, just shut down, quit, leave, take early retirement, whatever it was, a lot of them. And man, that made me sad, that broke my heart, but also that was kind of like a fuel, I think, for me personally, where it was like, dude, we can't have this happen. Like, what in the world? We can't have this happen. And so, I kind of went inside in that time. And by inside, I mean, I really relied heavily on my family, my friends. I've always tried to take an approach as a pastor that it's really important for me not to just be a pastor, but to literally have friends, And so I enjoy those friendships, and I really thrive off those. Also poured into really pulled a lot from mentors at that point in time, just calling them and having the appropriate place to vent, if that makes sense. But there's definitely moments of discouragement where you're like, is this what I do now? Like, is this, I just do like chaos control week to week? Because you're right, Mark, when you say, any decision was the wrong decision, you're actually, you're dead on. And the problem is indecision was a wrong decision as well. So it's not like you make this one or make that one and you're wrong. It's like making no decision is wrong as well. So no matter what, but I think at that point in time it was just so important, as always, just to be very forthright and honest. And I remember so many times standing up and preaching and just being like, look, guys, I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm really wrestling with this. This is really difficult, and just being able to be human. And our church has been so gracious in allowing our teaching team, our pastoral staff, just to be human and to be like, hey, we're walking right through this, we're walking through the fire right with you. And so that's but I did do, my wife and I, we started having like campfires every night in our backyard. I'm not lying, man, for like a good 2 hours every night. I probably spent thousands of dollars on wood. We just literally sat out back, just had a campfire and just detoxed from the day. And that was probably the most healthy thing that we did. We'd make our coffee, go out there and sit and just talk. And that was super healthy. But if I could, can I circle back to one of the things that Danny was saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, man. Yeah.
Because I'm not trying to be controversial at all, although I think this could be a really controversial statement. So I'm not trying to be controversial on your podcast, Pastor Mark, but I do want to say something.
Buckle up. Here we go.
No, it's not. So based on what Danny said, which I agree completely. He talked about that churches need to be strengthened, around the world. Other churches have been going through a lot worse than us. I completely agree. One of the things that I've seen during this whole thing is the divide grow bigger between, I want to be really careful how I say this, right? But the divide has grown exponentially larger between what I would say would be more like a biblical approach to pastoring, and maybe more a consumeristic approach to pastoring. And so I'm definitely not in the habit of throwing churches out there, throwing anybody under the bus. I think that we could all name a lot of them right now that are very consumer driven, very, I hate to use the word seeker friendly, but you get my point. And I think what has happened is that the division between the two has grown much wider, like exponentially wider. And so I think there's been a lot of consumeristic churches. And here's the part where I think it might be a little bit tough, but it is what it is. I think there's a lot of churches that we're all consumeristic to a degree, right? But a lot of churches that were very seeker-driven, consumeristic in nature, really not centered on the gospel, that closed down, that haven't opened back up. And I hope they don't. I think that God utilized this time to shut down a lot of that which should be shut down. And I think a lot of those individuals who are congregants there have been like, man, I'm not hearing anything that is helping me at all. I'm hearing a lot of opinions. I'm hearing how maybe I should respond to my marriage during this time, or how to be a better dad during this time, but I'm not getting I need truth. And so we're having all these people come into our church. We're doing the same thing we've always done. And they're like, man, we just love that we're hearing the word. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what else are you going to hear? But people are just so hungry for and deprived of truth, right? And an accurate biblical worldview, that when you just present that, I think that people are just craving it, because right now everybody wants to know what is truth. People are like, what's the truth? What's the truth about COVID? What's the truth about our elections? What's the truth about this, the mortality? What's the truth? And I'm not in the habit of getting into opinion battles, but the one thing that I can do, and the one thing we are uniquely equipped to do, is to present the absolute truth of Scripture. And so if we're not doing that, number one, we're not being faithful. Number two, we're not being good stewards. And number three, we're not being good people. We're just not being good people in general, as people that know better, know what truth is. So there's been a lot of churches that have gone away, but I think that's good. I hate to say that. I think it's good because I think it's driven people who are hungry for truth to places that were very welcoming and desiring to give them truth. That is not just a statement about our church. Prayerfully, that's a statement about every one of our churches. Prayerfully, that's a statement about maybe some churches that weren't on that tip before shifting towards that. So that's just I'm not trying to be controversial. My heart breaks, but on the same time, I see God working and moving and doing things now that I haven't seen in my lifetime before.
Yeah. Yeah. And so right in that vein, man, what are some things, do you think there are any significant changes? So as we're thinking about moving forward here, we'll turn the corner here. As we think about moving forward, and this can be for your church or maybe just the church. Do you think that there are any significant changes for the church that will come as a result of the past year, 5 months, and who knows what's ahead of us, right? But I'm just talking about, as we're recording today, what we've walked through. Do you think there's any significant changes coming for the church? Anything you see? Danny, you go first. And it can be, and again, it can be the church. It can be your church.
I like these softball questions. I'd say I'd say for it's us, and we're part of the church. So that's how, I'm trying to lead my church. I think God wants the church to go. So I think our people have valued gathering in a way they never have before. They value the fellowship of other believers. They see that now, maybe in a way they hadn't before. I know when I don't know how it was with you guys when it all first went down. So my birthday was like a week and a half. So my birthday was on March 29th, and I'm just going to be here's my confession to my other priests here. We were launching the other campus because I was like, how many pastors can say they launched another church on their birthday? I was like, we're doing it. That's it. Like, I mean, it was within a week of when we were going to anyways, but I was like, come on, we got to line this up here. So, and maybe that's why the pandemic happened, was because of my pride. So after that, obviously what happened in our community was they would do birthday parades for people, for the kids. And so my church did one for me. It was, again, like a week and a half after it happened, they set it up. And my ministry assistant had everybody gather here at our church, which is like a mile from where I live. And she said people were pulling in. It had been a week and a half, 2 Sundays. That's it. 2 Sundays that we hadn't gathered. And she said people were in tears.
Wow.
Just seeing each other.
Yeah.
And so I just early on, I knew, okay, like that's a value point we've really got to cling on to. And so when we gathered back, man, that first Sunday, I was in tears. Like, I mean, I don't think there was a dry eye in our building. And so now the hard part is, how do we keep that? How do we keep this good gift? This is a good gift we got out of this really bad thing that happened, the pandemic. This is a good gift as God's reminded us how awesome his body is, how awesome when the church is united and together. What a good thing this really is for us and for the world, that we can unite it, go out together. So I think that's probably for at least for us, and hopefully for the church, is, man, to really value gathering, to value unity.
Yeah.
I'm thankful there's not much disunity within our convention, specifically right now. Are you still SBC or are you independent?
We're holding strong, SBCers.
Okay, I didn't know. We all got I don't think any of our churches have Baptists in it, right?
No.
Like good planners.
Right.
And so, no, but I mean, you guys see it, and I'm about, like, here's what's happened is all the brethren from the church of the SBC, they haven't been together. And God made us to do life together. So when we quarrel face to face. So we can work those differences out. When we're doing this thing online, you got a bunch of keyboard heroes that are killing their testimony. And they're not just killing their testimony, they're killing the testimony of the church, because the world sees the church fighting with itself. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is not just how do we keep fellowship and enjoy the gathering? How do we stay unified in the mission and let all this other stuff go by? I heard somebody tweeted, I don't know who it was, so I'm stealing it until you guys can prove me wrong that it wasn't me, but it is somebody else. They said, man, wish the SBC could just go back to fighting on the song Reckless Love. Wish that was the biggest argument we were dealing with. So yeah, I think that's it, man. Like, how do we stay unified as a church? How do we continue to enjoy gathering? And then how do we get those on the outside in? Like, how do we gather the sheep that haven't come into the pen yet, using biblical language, but how do we go and make our mission outward focused to draw those people in? Because we want more people to be unified with us in this mission God's given us. So, yeah.
That's good. Travis, what about you, man? And it can be just strictly speaking for, the church you're serving at, or the church. Anything you see, hey, I hope the church learns this from what we've just walked through.
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things have changed, right? And I think we'll find out the outcome of whether they're good or bad in the near future. I think one of the things that has changed and shifted in all churches is the fact that they were online. They're online at some point in time. Even the churches. I mean, we got. I mean, just much like Danny, we tried to help other local churches as well, setting up video production and how to do whatever. But I mean, I don't know how many videos that I saw of people doing church online where it's a dude literally just with his phone, and he's just holding it up and it's wobbling around, or somebody drops it, and or they're like taking a phone doing this and then going over to the lyrics on the screen so people can watch it online. So here's the fact. I think now online church is here, and it's not going away. It's here to stay, which brings up a lot of questions for future church, for sure. I think that another effect is there are people who have not come back to church who are not going to come back to church. I think there's people maybe in an older demographic who have just decided, we're good. We're good. We're just going to watch from home. We're going to do that. And I don't know if and when they actually do come back to church long haul. So figuring out how do we minister to them, figuring out how do we balance a healthy online presence. But also one of the things that came really to the surface was, man, just the burden to make sure that our church knows that for me as a pastor, my desire is to be a local church pastor. That's my desire. My desire is to be a local church pastor that raises up other local church pastors and plants them in other local areas. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I have no personal desires beyond that. I have no, that's just what it is. So I think that when people know, like, hey, this church cares about me, they care about my kids, they want to know what's going on in my life. I think one of the other things that's come about has just been this reminder that we need to follow through with Ephesians 4 in such a greater way and equip the saints for the work of ministry. That was never more important than it has been this last year. My role, my job, our job as a team here is a lot of things. You guys get that. But primarily it's to equip people, equip the church to be the church. And when you start talking about, like, hey, if you're in a position like we were in, like some of Danny's friends are in, where you can't gather, you don't have the option. You physically can't gather. How do you continue to be the church when the church can't gather in the way that it's used to gathering? I think we've encountered that. I think maybe moving forward, we might encounter that again, maybe even in greater measure. That doesn't mean that we stop being the church, but how do we be the church more? I was almost going to say more better, but that's bad. How do we continue to be the church in an ever increasing effective way, not just outside of Sunday morning, but like day in and day out, through leaders that we've raised up and trained who hold a biblical worldview and know how to defend that worldview. So for us as a church, I'm gonna be honest with you, I think that for years we wasted we didn't waste all the years, but I think that I wasn't as intentional in really training people in an understanding of why they believe what they believe. This last year, why people believe what they believe has been under attack. And so you see people like saying, well, what do I believe about the goodness of God? What do I believe about the providence or the sovereignty of God? What does it mean to actually be a Christian in persecution? What would that actually look like? How would I respond? And I think it's incumbent on us as leaders in our churches to set the tone, set the precedent, develop programs, build leaders, disciple people, so that they have answers to some of these big questions. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me, man, is just moving forward. We really need to be about the business, in my opinion, of equipping people to not only know what they believe, but to lead on the conviction of what they believe, fueled by Scripture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, man, that makes total sense. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's been a challenge, man. I mean, that's definitely a challenge, Yeah. But trying to raise up leaders, trying to get more people involved in the conversation, the whole priesthood of all believers, just really trying to institute that into our body. We've talked about doing a whole lot of different things, but important things rise to the surface in a time of crisis, and we don't want to forget those things if and when we slink back into a time of normalcy. So,
man, yeah.
Let me, I want to just say something real quick. So really appreciate, Travis, what you were saying there. I mean, it's almost like Jesus, when he said, make disciples, like that was the thing we should be doing the whole time. Right. So, but I think like when you were saying that, I was just being reminded, like, okay, so we went through this, year and a half, and how long did it take before we really started struggling? And here we are, a couple of guys who have been classically trained in the scriptures by some of the, greatest minds in theological, the theological world, rubbing arms with some of the greatest ministry leaders that we could have ever thought about doing or being around. And it only took a couple months for us to really start struggling. So how long does it take for just the average Joe who's just trying to grow in Christ? They really do. Their heart's in the right place. Man, they're trying to keep that 40-hour-a-week job. They're trying to keep their marriage in order. They're trying to figure out how to deal with their 3 kids and then the 2 step-kids they got on this second marriage. And they're struggling with, and we're going, why aren't you sharing your faith more? Why aren't you, and so, I mean, it's just a reminder, like, man, how compassionate we need to be and like trying to help them along instead of just yelling at them like a boot camp drill sergeant saying, get up here, And I think too, like, and we may land on different spots, all 3 of us here, because I think we're in 3 different settings. Part of this may be saved for another discussion one day, because you were saying, hey, the online church is here. You're going to have to nail that philosophy down. I think every pastor is going to have to nail what's their view on that, because like I'll just tell you where we're at right now. Like we've been online for, I don't know, for a while. And when we started coming back from the pandemic, that was the first time I really made a big deal. Like, you need to come back. And and so we like set like, hey, our strategy of doing online, I had never even thought about doing a strategy online. I said, hey, it's free. Let's just put it out there. It's not a big deal. Was okay. Our view now is that our live feed that's a voyeuristic view. Like you can voyeuristically look in and see what the church is doing. Like, but the church for us should be gathered. Like, you need to be here. Like you were saying, I desire to be a local church pastor. And so I think churches in the future, and so in your context, Mark, in our context here, you're going to have to define like, okay, what if somebody says, hey, I've been going to church there for 3 years. I've been online every week. I want to join as a member.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's your, and hopefully your covenant and all that has all that in place already. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have to think through that. And so that was just a good reminder. It's here to stay. So we better figure out like, how are we going to navigate that instead of waiting till we get kicked in the face with it. And we're trying to answer those questions at that point.
I agree completely, man. I mean, it was weird when you start, putting some resources and whatnot towards an online. We had a steep learning curve, right? And then seeing people from different states, that you are loosely connected with. I was a youth pastor in Maine for like 4 years. So there's like 20 people from Bangor, Maine watching, on a Sunday. They're like, our church is shut down, so we're just watching. It's like, all right. You got some rando dude in Uganda watching, like writing you. It's really weird. And I think, yeah, a strategy is so important. I think it would be really easy to be like, man, everybody, we got people watching all around the world, like that. The fact is, when you really are centered on, hey, I want to be a local church pastor. I don't know how to shepherd a dude up in Bangor, Maine, when I live in Ohio with 5 kids living out, with my wife. I can't do that. And so the encouragement of getting, hey, you need to be plugged into a local church. If your church is shut down, man, we're happy to have you watch in, but primarily our online is for our own church members who may be sick and shut in or just may not be able to make it that day. But yeah, man, you're so right. When I think there is a dangerous curve or a slippery slope when you start designing things for people who are not in your church, so that they can participate in your church as if they were a part of your church, even though they're missing out on the body of your church. that becomes, that's a dog chasing its tail, man, and dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you shepherd those entrusted to you if you don't know who they are?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, and so this is part of our calling now, in this new it's not a new technology age, but, this new season of, hey, this is, really getting widespread. How do we navigate that? So, yeah, good thoughts there, man.
Yeah.
That's good. Man, I think we could go all day. But man, this has been great, man, just to connect with you guys and see how you've been walking through the season, where you're at. But hey, listen, I want to give people watching this and listening an opportunity to connect with you online. So Danny, anybody that's watching or listening to this, and they're saying, hey, I'd love to connect with that guy, ask him a couple questions, or just learn more about him. Danny, where can people find you, connect with you online, in your church, anything like that?
So Danny Donato on Facebook, and then Danny Donato, that's Donato, Danny Donato 7 on Twitter, even though I'm not on that as much. And then Danny at lcc-nashville.com. And that's the same as our website. So
awesome. What is the website for your church?
lcc-nashville.com. Lighthouse Community Church, LCC.
Awesome. Travis, man, same thing. How can people connect with you, man?
Yeah. Probably the best way would be just through our website, online stuff, just covenantchurch.us. And then we're COVNT Church. That's on Facebook. We've got the Twitter, Travis Davenport Twitter, all that kind of same stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome. Guys, thanks so much for being on, man. It's been a blast.
Thanks for having me, man. It's an honor.
Thanks, man. It's been good to just connect with you guys, and I look forward, man. As goofy, we should do a podcast someday with some other guys, and maybe we'll just do telling stories from the.
Oh, goodness,
that terrifies me.
Yeah, I don't have the editing capability, man.
Hey, it's fun watching you guys, and I can't wait until, man, we just see the impact one day, just one day when we're sitting back. So
awesome.